All right, welcome back, everybody. This is Strange Planet. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about how Trump was found liable for sex abuse and defamation in the Carroll case. And I believe Trump is ordered to pay $5 million in damages. And we're also going to talk about compulsive liar. George Santos is now facing 13 federal charges for fraud. I mean, that's a real big shocker, right? This guy lies about everything. But first, we're going to talk about Trump's situation. Rook, Mark, what are your thoughts here?
Well, this is the first time, if I'm not mistaken, that Trump was actually held liable for something. He's being held to account by, a court and a jury. There have been out-of-court settlements, like Trump University case that he settled out of court. He's famous for paying Stormy Daniels off, and there's that whole case there. But I think this is the first time that Trump was nailed on something, and it looks like it can stick. Because, he's going to appeal as a matter of course, and if he were a typical politician, this sort of judgment against him would be problematic because he's running for president and held liable for sexual abuse and defamation of a person he committed sexual abuse against. So normally that would sink a presidential campaign, but for Trump, it's just a Tuesday. So there's definitely something to celebrate here for fans of justice and truth in this country. Of course, he's going to, he probably already had his lawyers file an appeal, but there's not really much. I don't see legally the argument that he could make. It's just probably just going to delay him making a payment or start making payments on that $5 million until after the election, maybe. I don't know. But I don't know what his objective is, but he probably just does not want to pay it right now and is going to delay things as much as possible. I don't think he can really do that until the election, which is more than a year away. So it's going to be interesting to see how vigorously he fights it and whether, that's going to end up being even more of an expense for him.
Okay, so I kind of agree with Rook. But in the fact that I think that Trump's going to try to drag this out as long as possible. But that's only if he gets the Republican nomination, right? So if he doesn't get that, then he's pretty much shit out of luck.
Yeah, I mean, the field for the Republican Party is going to grow pretty large. And it's already getting crowded, especially with Trump is not an incumbent, but he is the sort of incumbent candidate for the Republican Party since he was last president. He's in the unusual spot of having lost the Oval Office and is trying to regain it again. Usually presidents, if they lose, they go home and don't try to run for president again. That's not the case with Trump. He was a sore loser even before he won his first election. He was a sore loser. He complained about the election being stolen from him, and he ended up winning. So the fact that he's running again is not a surprise. He didn't like the way that the country decided last time, and he's going to try to stay in the race as long as possible. I could even see him running as a third-party candidate if he doesn't get the Republican nomination. Which I still think he has the best chance of getting the nomination out of any candidate. I don't see him losing it. But if he does, I think he's definitely running as a third party candidate.
No kidding.
But he's going to use it as a shield. That's what he's trying to do. This way he doesn't get all these lawsuits coming in at him.
Right. Now here's my $1 million question. Do you think this is going to be a recurring thing? Like, paint a picture real quick. Say he does, become the candidate and it's Trump versus Biden again. But say Biden does win and Trump's out. Do you think he's going to finally pack his bags and call it a day? Or do you think he's going to try again 4 years later? And this is going to be something that's going to, keep reoccurring.
How old will he be in
Well, that's a good point, too.
2028?
But this is Trump we're talking. He thinks he's 35 probably.
Yeah, I don't think that he has another race in him after this. Yeah, he is definitely getting up there in age, we'll say.
And with all this new information that's been coming out too, I feel like this really isn't helping anybody, his cause whatsoever. And then his mouth makes it even worse. So you would almost think this term coming up, it's not looking good. But, it seems like his followers just kind of look the other way and leave it at that,
Well, yeah. I mean, that's basically the MAGA way, is just to kind of turn a blind eye to whatever's going on.
Well, I was going to say, what cracks me up about that whole MAGA thing and stuff in general? It's just like, we had 4 years of it. What did he do that made it so great? Am I missing something? Because, I don't see how that even can be reapplied. Because when you think about, Make America Great Again, he had 4 years to try to do that. And if anything, he only made it worse. So, maybe a new catchphrase or something? Because I feel like that whole kind of slogan died. It should be "My ass got arrested," like I've said before. Because that seems to be what's happening in more recent events.
Yeah, I don't think, as long as he promises to bring destruction to the liberals and Democrats, I don't think the Republican Party cares about him keeping promises.
Got that right.
As long as he tries, as long as he gives it a good college try, I don't think they really care about what happens in terms of legislation. They already got what they wanted in terms of the Supreme Court nominations, and they have the Supreme Court for the next, half a century probably. Maybe not that long, but definitely for the next 25 years at least.
Ouch.
I thought it was something that there was talk about, maybe getting Clarence Thomas impeached. Is that even possible?
I mean, for that to occur, the Republicans in the Senate would have to cooperate and
be on board. Yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Nah, I'm with you on that too.
I don't see that happening either.
Clarence Thomas could fucking rape a squirrel in front of the Senate buildings, and I don't think the Republican Party would really care, and they wouldn't impeach him. They wouldn't even bat an eye.
Nothing to see here.
Of course, he's been accused of more, shall we say, conflicts of interest in terms of his seat on the Supreme Court and getting, he basically has a billionaire sugar daddy.
Pretty much, right?
Taking him on trips, paying for some family member to go to school. His grandson, I don't even, it's just disgusting. It's
like we were saying a few weeks back on a past episode too. It's one of those situations where, you would think the objective is to try to get all the bad apples, or all the rotten apples out of the bunch, so it doesn't, fuck the rest up pretty much. But it seems like once these people claim this power and they get in, it's for life, and that's it. Once they're in, it almost seems like they're almost impossible to remove. And the more crazy they are, the more likely somehow they are to stay. It's I don't see how we're going to move forward as a nation with this. You know what I mean?
The crazier they are, the less they care about how the public perceives them. And that actually appeals to a large swath of the Republican and conservatives. So if you're willing to do or say anything against liberals and Democrats and those constituencies, then that's all the more reason to elect you, because you can say those things without any shame.
And I guess it does bring a lot of attention and publicity too, so they like all that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, speaking of shame, you asked about George Santos, and
yep.
Yeah, he's finally been charged. The law moves kind of slow, but he was finally charged with 13 federal counts of fraud.
No way.
So one of the things that he's alleged to have done is he filed for unemployment and collected unemployment in New York for over a year while he was also collecting $120,000 a year from employment in Florida. So I don't see how he thought he could get away with that. But, I mean, look at his quote-unquote resume. He's been getting away with shit for a very long time and lying about it. So, what's a little unemployment fraud?
Right? Just add that to the list. It's unbelievable with that guy. I feel like every time he opens his mouth, like like I said before, I don't even know if that's his real name because everything. I've never seen someone where like everything that comes out of his mouth is bullshit. Everything from his schooling to where he lives to his family to his religion, you name it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how you lie, not only about going to college and like, all right, said that he went to NYU and like some other university, right? Not only did this motherfucker, he didn't even go to college. Like he said he went to a prestigious college. He didn't even go to college, okay? Not only did he not go to college, he also lied about the high school that he went to. He said he graduated from like Horace Mann, which is a prestigious private high school, okay? So, but hold on. He said he graduated from Horace Mann, but guess what? The motherfucker didn't even graduate from high school. He dropped out of high school. Like, I just don't get how he has no shame in his game. Just absolutely none.
And the funny part about it is, it seems like every time he does open his mouth and he says something, not only is it not true, but it's usually the complete opposite of what he says. Now, you know what I mean? Because remember, you just said he thought he went to some, really great school. Turned out he didn't even finish high school. Like, yeah.
And he finally, I guess, sort of admitted that he lied.
About time.
He's like, oh, the pressure, it's so, like, people, when you're running for office, they expect these things. Of course they fucking do. They don't want to hire some fucking bum off the street who commits fraud everywhere he goes. They want someone. Well, actually, I don't know what the Republican Party wants.
That's a good point.
They elect Trump and Santos. Usually, like, sane people want politicians that represent them, and they want representatives that are, honorable or at least passably honorable. This guy, like, I just don't know how he's still in office. Like, oh, you want to know how? Because Kevin McCarthy stood by him. He even assigned him to committees. Wow. Despite these series of lies that, haven't even been resolved yet fully. He assigned him to these committees. And Santos himself voluntarily, I think, pulled himself off of the committees pending the congressional investigations of all of his fraudulent behavior. So, like, McCarthy is to blame for him still being there. Because he's such a fucking pussy because he needed his vote to become speaker.
Right.
He needed every last vote. So he sucked up to Santos. He ignored all of his fraudulent behavior.
Supposedly, he says recently that he's not supporting him anymore, but that's probably because he already got the vote and he already got what he needed. So now, wash your hands. You're on your own now. Like, you know what I mean? So it's,
it's a little late for that.
Right.
It's a little late for that. Now, I'm not a fan of Lauren Boebert.
Nope.
But I'll give her one thing. She didn't graduate from high school. She dropped out and got her GED right before running for office. But at least she was honest about that.
Right.
She gave the people a choice based on who she was in her resume, and they chose to elect her.
Yeah, she wasn't over there lying, saying went to some Ivy League school or, you know what I mean, coming up with some bullshit story. At least she came out with it, you know?
Right. She let the voters know who she was, what her background was, what her education was. And so the voters made a choice. And I'm not a fan of her, but yeah, I can respect that she was honest about it and the voters made a choice as to who their representative should be. New Yorkers in Long Island, where Santos is from, they didn't get that choice.
They didn't. That's true.
Santos lied to them almost about everything. And so the voters did not get to see who Santos was or is. And I don't think we know yet who this guy is.
Yeah, for real.
And I think the 13 counts, along with other investigations that are going on, are going to go a long way towards resolving who George Santos is.
This is why people in America are sick of politics and hate politics. Because the everyday rational human being doesn't want to have to deal with the stupidity behind their politicians. They just want the politicians to do their jobs. But they're not doing their jobs. They're doing something completely different. I mean, we need a better breed of politicians in this country. I think we deserve that, but I don't know. Maybe George Carlin was right. Garbage in, garbage out, and that's the way it's going to end up.
One thing I think that could, I mean, this is figuratively speaking, of course, but one thing I feel like that could result in what you said, though, is like if they actually were to do term limits, say, because wouldn't that filter them out eventually?
Yeah, but I mean, look at what Trump was trying to do at the end of his presidency. He wanted to I should get elected for a second and a third term, and maybe even a fourth for a bonus if I do a good job. Who fucking knows?
That reminds me of when he said that. It reminded me of this scene from that show on Netflix,
House of Cards.
House of Cards.
Yep.
When Frank Underwood just started going back and forth with Claire Underwood, his wife, about being elected president, every 4 years. Like one of them is president, like they're like 2020 and 2024 and 2028 and 2032. And, they were going back and forth with each other about how the Underwoods were going to control the presidency going forward. And it was at that point, it was clear that they weren't going to give up the presidency willingly. And when Trump said that, you definitely got that sort of Frank Underwood vibe from him. And judging by January 6th and all that we know about his efforts to stop the peaceful transfer of power, I think that we came close to that.
Oh, yeah.
And we probably came closer to that than we know. And luckily, our institutions were strong enough to withstand that test.
That's the one thing I will say. Despite all the craziness, this country is America definitely is resilient, isn't it now?
Yeah.
In the end. It really is. And that's one thing to never forget.
I don't know that if we elect Trump, that we're going to get another chance like that. Because Trump saw what happened to him the last time he lost.
Right, right.
The consequences, the legal consequences for him that are starting to converge on him. I think that if he's elected president, it's going to be about revenge and using the power of the presidency to punish those who went after him legally and to prevent him or his family or his cronies from being punished in the future.
That's kind of a scary thought if you think about it too, because that's gonna. If you thought he acted like a dictator in the first term, rather.
Yeah, now he knows the consequences of breaking the law and losing, or he soon will know the consequences. But if he gains power again, he pretty much has no choice but to abuse that power for his gain.
So, what are the odds that you think that he is going to be the candidate?
I think it's highly likely. I mean,
Sadly,
I don't see anyone really challenging him that much. DeSantis, maybe he'll come and go, though. I don't think. Yeah, DeSantis is scary because you look at him, he seems like a pretty dumb guy, but he's actually a Harvard educated lawyer. He's not dumb at all, and he just plays dumb on TV for the Floridians down there and for the national Republican audience. He is very much a conservative and very much this new breed of conservative that is very much in the vein of Trump and is willing to, if you thought Republicans were social warriors before, you ain't seen nothing yet. They already won the Roe versus Wade war. Well, they can't even call it a battle anymore. They won the war because they overturned Roe v. Wade. They won the war. And now they're not satisfied with that. They're going to make sure that everything of social value and fairness and justice that this country has progressed on for the last half century, they're going to make sure that all of that is overturned.
and that's the scary part, especially that Roe v. Wade overturn in general. Because, like you were just saying, normally the people fight for rights, which in turn, usually it takes time, it becomes granted. But this was the first time that I can think of, at least in especially recent history, where it was taken away. An actual right was taken away. I don't think people realize
history,
that.
yes.
Yeah, in like recent years.
Definitely not.
But yeah, right.
I mean,
they also
other
did that
countries
with the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
They didn't renew it, and the Supreme Court said, "Oh, you know what?" So this is what I don't get about the Supreme Court, right? They say they don't want to get involved in political questions, and in legal speak, political question doctrine is basically that the court doesn't want to get into fights about issues dealing with co-equal branches of government. They'll just stay out of those type of legal issues. And so when it comes to whether there is sufficient racism in this country to justify having a Voting Rights Act, that basically the part of it that was overturned just says, so yeah, for the last couple of centuries or so, yeah, these states have routinely, denied African Americans and other minorities the right to vote. They've designed all types of traps and tricks in their voting laws. Even after on paper they had the right to vote, they designed all types of ways to keep them away from the polls. And so the Voting Rights Act basically just said, okay, enough of this. If you want to have new voting laws, you have to submit them to the Department of Justice to review them first before they're implemented. That's all. And if they're fair, then, you can have that new voting law. Now what they do, because there's not that what's called pre-clearance anymore, they can just pass whatever law they want, no matter how much it violates rights. And they can do so a week before the election. They can say, you know what? Black people like to vote on Sundays. So you know what? We're just going to, a week before the election, do away with Sunday voting. It's not on paper, it's not saying we hate black people. It's saying, we're just not going to allow people to vote on that day. Just a coincidence, right? So it's laws like that. They can just sneak in now at the last second, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can file a motion in court to try to get it to stop or whatever, But the Department of Justice no longer has to approve of laws like that. They no longer, can review it beforehand. So, right before an election, you know what? They can do anything they want, and there's nothing you can do about it. And after the fact, it's already too late because people already voted. So, there's all of these voter suppression tactics that states and different jurisdictions have instituted. And, so that's another right that people had that has been rolled back as a consequence of conservatives.
That's sick.
And the conservative Supreme Court.
That's unbelievable. It really is. And to be able to just do something like that without like any control, because that is rigging the system to a certain degree. If you think about it, that's not allowing a certain, ethnicity to be able to partake in our elections.
Yeah,
and their citizens.
Just basically figure out, okay, what do Black people do, or what do Latino people do, since, or what does this group do? So let's take that away at the last moment before an election, and there's nothing they can do about it because the Voting Rights Act section that was in place to protect against that is no longer there. Ouch. And that's exactly the reason. And the most aggravating thing about it is that the Supreme Court decided, it's no longer needed. So
Jeez.
the Congress renewed the Voting Rights Act pretty much unanimously. There may have been like maybe one vote, like Republicans and Democrats voted to renew this. And the Supreme Court said, no, we know better. We know better. We think that it was constitutional before, but now it's no longer necessary because states don't do this anymore. They don't discriminate anymore. There's no more racism. So they're not, they're not going to do this anymore. And what do? As soon as the the Department of Justice is out of the way, they institute these fucking voter suppression laws. Like it's predictable, but yet the Supreme Court has no fucking accountability at all. They're appointed for life, and they get to sit there and not even say anything. Look at fucking Clarence Thomas. He gets to sit there and not even say anything. And only under the vague threat of impeachment can he even lose his spot. Like, fuck that.
For real. Because the reality of that, too, is it's almost like as if they know certain cities or towns are going to vote a specific way, and they're all of one culture, say, or mostly of one culture. By doing that, eliminates that entire possibility.
Oh, yeah.
Entirely.
That has to do with, like, drawing, like, boundaries and a whole history of racial segregation and, actually designing neighborhoods to be that way. But that's a whole nother issue that I don't know if we have time to go into.
Sounds like we'll be revisiting that, but that's, for real though, that's just, now here, let me ask you this. I mean, this is really taking a shot in the dark here, but do you see it being possible at any point that it could go back to the way it was, in that with the Supreme Court not being able to just pass anything like that for the voter suppression per se? Like if they can just pass something a week before, you know what I mean, without it, just them just being able to do it, is there any way where it could revert back to the way where they can't just, like, could it go back to the way it initially was where that wasn't the case?
The Voting Rights Act, it's up for renewal. Like, you could rewrite the sections of the Voting Rights Act that the Supreme Court got rid of. You could rewrite them in a way that satisfies their changed jurisprudence, because it was fine before. It was fine all this time, since, 1968 or something like that. It was fine all of this time. And the Supreme Court, in their decision, even said it was fine. But now,
suddenly,
coincidentally, now it's unconstitutional because they decided as the Supreme Court that there's no more racism or that there's no racial discrimination sufficient to justify that. Now, this is what gets me about the bullshit of conservatism, right? So their whole idea is that the court should stay out of these type of issues because they don't know. Like the Congress is the body that's supposed to decide those things. They are, closer to the people, and they can assess for themselves, along with the executive branch who signs the laws. They can assess what the conditions on the ground are. So how does the Supreme Court, who is not involved in any sense with the electorate, in any sense with elections, they're not elected, how are they going to assess the data? That's not what the Supreme Court does. But yet, in this case, they decided to go after, they decided they know better than Congress. They can assess this better than Congress, who voted almost unanimously to renew the Voting Rights Act. Like, wow. The Supreme Court, I just have zero respect for them. Zero.
I agree.
They can go fuck themselves. Like,
for real, man. Because this is I hate to say, but I feel like this is almost, maybe I'm overstepping a little, but maybe not. But it kind of feels like the road towards oligarchy.
Like, I can no longer buy a single argument that the Supreme Court hands down now, because it's bullshit. They just revealed themselves as a partisan political wing. That's all they are. That really is. And they've ruined our Supreme Court. They did.
I agree. Now, as being someone that, like I was also saying before, that also likes to incorporate not only the hope, but the repair aspect of things, is there any way, of course, this is not something because of this, circumstances here, is this something that could be repaired, or is it probably broken permanently at this point?
It's basically broken along with the rest of our political system. So I don't think the Supreme Court can be rehabilitated without also rehabilitating the political system in this country, and that's a tall order.
There's so much wrong with not just the political system, although that's really the one part of our country we're supposed to be able to use to change things. But now it's under the control of all these fucking idiots. So now I think it's all about money in this country. That's all that it's about. Whether it's the political system, whether it's the medical system, whether it's the educational system, whatever it is, money makes this country run. And that's why our country...
That and power, especially political power. They never want to give that up. Once they get it, that's it.
That's all that comes with money. You can buy political power. Look at these fucking idiots running around like chickens without heads on. Oh, what? Oh, shootings in schools? No, it's the trans. No, it's the religious words in books. No, it's the cartoons. It's they're anything other than the gorilla staring them in the face. The 500-pound gorilla in the room or whatever the hell it is. It's just that's who's paying their checks, and among other people. Until we can get that kind of money out of our government system, nothing's going to change.
That's got some truth to it too.
You'll have some people who are like Harvey Dents coming into it, wanting to make change and everything, but then eventually they're going to get smacked in the face with something, and they're going to fall in line with the rest.
So if I understand this correctly too, the way I see what you were saying about the Supreme Court now, though, is it doesn't even matter what it is that they're proposing or going to pass. They can just pass it. But say they say tomorrow, they want to suppress more voting per se or something like that.
Who?
They're a Supreme Court, so they can
the
Supreme
Court doesn't suppress voting. It's states that decide to suppress voting. State legislatures or cities or governments The Supreme Court is supposed to be sort of the arbiter that says whether something or not is fair.
Right.
In terms of whether it violates people's rights. But we're supposed to have laws in place that preemptively prevent these type of things from taking place. Because if you have laws that proactively go after certain groups of people, if you have those laws on the books, whether it's 10 months before an election or 2 weeks before an election or 2 days before an election, say a decision was made to close certain polling sites. That's what they do. They say, you know what, we're going to close like specific polling sites, so it makes it harder for people to vote. They have to go drive, like, if they even have a car, they have to go drive hours away to get to their polling station and wait like hours.
Like another city or something. Yeah,
right.
Yep.
Right, that's what they do. They selectively say, where do certain people vote? Let's close down, and it's already overcrowded, so let's close down certain places. And by the time they figure out, oh, well, yeah, that was probably done with like, a motivation to suppress certain votes, it's already too late because the election has already happened.
Right. And it's funny, in a democracy too, you would kind of think the step would be the opposite of that, whereas they would be putting more of these things out to encourage voting. So instead, it's like they're curbing it on certain sides because they know, if we do this here, our chances of winning this state now is probably a little better. You know what I mean? So it's like a royal suppression, but for their own personal party gain, which is entirely fucked up.
Yep, that's basically how it goes.
See, like what I was trying to contemplate while we were talking here was like I was saying about repairing or some way we can fix this, or if there is even a way to do that. But like, obviously there's nothing any of us can do, you know what I mean? But like your vote is really where it matters most. And the realistic thing is, I think a lot of people also need to pay more attention to the other elections that are not, presidentially run or things like that. Like your local ones also, they matter. So like those are things, that you really should be paying attention to, because that actually will affect you even more so, because that's your city, your town, or wherever you live. That affects you personally through that. And like we were saying before, all these states, they come up with their own shit. They're not all the same whatsoever. Some of them are alike, but no two states are exactly the same. You know what I mean? So you got to factor all this stuff in. That's why I will say, you can say what you want about New York, but I do love this state and I do love that city. So I'm just going to throw that in there. Just like most, it's got its problems, but just something about it that, like, it's one of the greatest places in the world. It really is.
Yeah, it's funny because there's actually, so most of the territories that were subject to preclearance by the Department of Justice under the Voting Rights Act, for historical discrimination, most of them were states, but there actually were a few territories, like within some states, so they wouldn't necessarily make the whole state submit their new laws to the Department of Justice, but just specific territories. And there was actually a place in New York where that was subject to preclearance because of their history of racial discrimination.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I forget where it was, but I was shocked to find that out.
Yeah, that's wow. I would have never guessed that. That's our show for this week, everyone. Strange Planet will have new episodes on YouTube every Friday. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.